Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's FAA's Drone Advisory Committee meeting on Zoom. We are also live streaming this meeting on the FAA's YouTube channel, Twitter, and Facebook pages. Before we start the DAC meeting, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping items. First, we ask that everyone remain muted during the presentations. After each briefing, there will be an opportunity for the DAC members to engage in discussion and ask questions. Because of the large size of the group, we ask that you first raise your hand using the Zoom command on your dashboard. I will be moderating and will monitor the dashboard and call on you to begin speaking. Second, a reminder this DAC meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording will be archived and will be made available for future viewing on the FAA's YouTube channel. Lastly, our FAA team is monitoring the meeting, so for those of you on Zoom, if you have problems at any time during the meeting, please make a note in the comments, also available in the Zoom dashboard, and we will assist you. So let's get started. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jay Merkel, who is the Executive Director of the UAS Integration Office and today's DAC Designated Federal Officer, for the official statement of the Designated Federal Officer and his opening remarks.
Thank you, Gary, and a warm welcome to all the DAC members joining us not only from around the United States, but we have one joining us from South Korea. It's the advantage of being able to do these things virtually. Also, a warm welcome to all of you joining us on the live stream. Before I begin my comments, I have a few procedural items to go through. First, as the designated federal official for the Drone Advisory Committee, I'd like to read the official statement. In accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, this advisory committee meeting is open to the public. Notice of the meeting was published in the Federal Register on January 28, 2021. Members of the public may address the committee with prior approval of the chairman. This should be arranged in advance. Only appointed members of the advisory committee may vote on any matters brought to a vote by the chairman. The public may present written material to the advisory committee at any time. The beginning of the year is always the time for transition for the FAA, and this year we also have the transition to a new administration. So first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bradley Mims, who's been nominated to be our next FAA Deputy Administrator, for some opening remarks. Over to you, Brad.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Jay, for that kind introduction. On behalf of our new Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, and Administrator Steve Dixon, I welcome all of you to the February 2021 Virtual Drone Advisory Committee meeting. This is the third virtual meeting of the Drone Advisory Committee, and we are finding that despite the limitations on travel restrictions, we are still able to connect and continue to accomplish the important work of the DAC. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited about the potential for this technology to help people and our economy. I look forward to continued innovation to help this industry grow and prosper in a safe manner over the next 4 years. As I continue to transition into my new role, I've already heard about the great work being done by the committee, and I'd like to thank each of you for your hard work and dedication. The work being done by this committee is directly contributing to our efforts to safely integrate drones into our national airspace system. When you think of drones, it is important to consider the accessibility and equity they bring to communities, providing STEM opportunities to students, delivering food and medicine, and goods and services, and creating new jobs. Applications for UAS technology are as diverse as their users. Everything from small package delivery to life-saving search and rescue missions conducted by public safety officials to infrastructure inspection. In fact, energy and infrastructure companies are using UAS to inspect pipelines, oil wells, transmission lines, or look for obstructions on railways or compromised bridge construction. In addition, commercial photography and aerial data collection applications have become routine in the real estate and insurance industries. And agricultural applications include everything from spraying crops and monitoring livestock to collecting data on field hydration and pest infestation. The numbers associated with the drone community show how important and growing this sector is. 870,000 drone registrations, 211,000 plus certified remote pilots, 37 certified agricultural operators, and 33 UAS type certification projects. But as we turn our attention to the challenges to routine, scalable, beyond visual line of sight operations, the work is going to get harder. This technology holds great promise, especially in the area of sustainability. And I, like all of you here, am eager to tackle these challenges and ensure our regulatory framework meets the needs of the industry. For 2021, I expect to see even more great feedback from the DAC, and I know I can count on this group to continue working in a spirit of joint cooperation that has been the ethos of this community. A new tasking for the DAC that will be discussed later by Jay is an important step as we seek to remove barriers and support the growth of this industry. So I just want to turn things back over. I know we have a full agenda today, so I turn it back over to Jay so we can get started. Thank you for having me. Look forward to working with you in the months and years to come.
Thank you, Brad. We're excited to have you as well. This is exciting work, and we're looking forward to have you get in there elbow to elbow with us, taking on these challenges. So in addition to this being Brad's first meeting, we have several new DAC members, and I'd like to introduce them today. We have Brandon Torres DeClet, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Measure, Dr. Kathy Cahill, Director of the Alaska Center for Unmanned Aircraft System Integration, Kenji Sugahara, President and Chief Executive Officer of Drone Service Providers Alliance, Adam Bry, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Skydio, Vic Moss, owner of Moss Photography, Salita Reynolds, the General Manager of the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, David Carbon, Vice President and General Manager of Amazon Prime Air, Dr. Paul Shu, Founder and Chair of Shu Education Foundation, Brad Hayden, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Robotic Skies, Molly Wilkinson, Vice President, Regulatory Affairs, American Airlines, Dr. Jaewon Shin, who is not new to drone advisory committees or this group at all, Executive Vice President, Head of the UAM Division, and Chief Executive Officer of Genesis Air Mobility, and Matt Parker, President of Precision Integrated Programs. So now that we've introduced and welcomed these new 12 members, they joined the 23 current members of the DAC and represent 14 different stakeholder groups within the drone community. The 35 members of the DAC altogether exemplify the diverse interests we have within the drone community. Next, I'd like to draw your attention to today's agenda. Today, we will hear the responses to the two recent DAC recommendations. The first is the response to Task Group 6 on Beyond Visual Line of Sight challenges. The second is a response to Task Group 8 on safety culture. Then we'll have updates from the chair of Task Group 9, which is the use of remote ID in traditional aviation, and then also the update from the Operations and Technology Subcommittee. Then finally, we will turn to a new tasking, which Brad alluded to, on gender neutral language in the drone advisory or in the drone ecosystem. Finally, we'll do new business and closing remarks. So that's the final housekeeping I have. And I'm going to move right into the agenda, or the final housekeeping I have is approving the minutes, and then we can move into the agenda. The minutes are from our October 22, 2020 meeting. These minutes have been posted on the DAC website and were also included in the read ahead material for this meeting. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve minutes from the October 22nd DAC meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any objections to the motion to approve the October 22, 2020 meeting minutes? Hearing no objections, the motion is passed. Now, before I turn it over to Michael, our chair, I want to again thank you for all the hard work the members of the DAC and the task groups have put into the last few months while we've been dealing with the COVID-19 health emergency. As many of you know, we've had some significant achievements occur since our last meeting. At the end of 2020, the FAA issued final rules on remote identification and ops over people, and those rules are currently under review at the Department of Transportation. These rules continue our efforts toward full and safe integration of UAS into the national airspace system. On Monday, we announced we are seeking partners to administer the Recreational UAS Safety Test, or TRUST. Information about this announcement is posted on the FAA's website and across our digital channel. Potential test administrators have until March 31st to submit their applications. For many of us, we're approaching 1 year of working in a virtual environment. This time has taught many of us that there are different ways of achieving results. This is the same mentality that needs to be used when developing solutions related to drone integration. We welcome the recommendations presented by the DAC to the FAA that present new and innovative solutions to the challenges we face related to the integration of drones into our national airspace system. The coming year will continue to be filled with plenty of opportunities to advance our drone integration efforts. Plans are well underway for holding our annual FAA UAS Symposium, along with many other high-profile events throughout the year. We look forward to working with Secretary Buttigieg and supporting department efforts in all their initiatives. In addition, we look forward to continuing to work with all of you on our shared goal of advancing drone integration. Thank you for all the hard work. And now I'd like to turn it over to our DAC chair, Michael Chasen, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Jay. It is great to see everyone again. I'd like to personally welcome all of the DAC members from around the country to our virtual DAC meeting, and also give a big welcome to those of you who are viewing live stream. Today, we are joined by many new DAC members that were recently appointed to serve on this committee, including members representing citizens, UAS operators, agricultural interests, and advanced air mobility. I am pleased to welcome you to your first of many meetings, and I'm looking forward to your engagement and contributions. Today also marks my final meeting as chairman of the DAC. It's been a great honor to lead this committee over the last 2 years, and I am extremely proud of all the accomplishments that we have achieved together. During my tenure, we tackled the many tough issues and provided the FAA with meaningful advice, including on how to improve the 107 waiver system, how to incentivize early adoption of remote ID, how to promote a safety culture among the drone committee, how to modernize facility maps, industry priorities for UTM capabilities. And I did it all while wearing jeans to the meetings and skipping wearing a tie. So thank you to all of the current and past DAC members for the many hours and days you spent working on these taskings. We asked a lot from you and you always delivered. I would also like to thank the FAA, especially Jay's team, for working with me and my special advisor, Diana Cooper, who many of you know has been instrumental to the DAC's success over the last 2 years. When I became chair, Diana and I worked closely with the FAA to bring meaningful changes to the DAC. In the true startup mentality, we wanted to move fast and break things. So for the first time, we issued taskings at every meeting. We gave 3-month deadlines to task groups, and each time we delivered recommendations to the FAA, we asked them to let us know how our recommendations were being adopted. The willingness of both the industry and the FAA to roll up their sleeves and take on challenging work time and time again to advance the safe integration of drones has been rewarding and inspiring, and a true startup mentality. And while I will no longer be chair, I will continue to be active as an individual in the drone industry. I've actually already begun my next adventure. I'm actually CEO of a new startup in the education space, Class Technologies, where we've added teaching and learning tools to Zoom. And maybe these tools can be used for remote drone training as well. Check it out, contact me, or please feel free to visit me at class.com at my new company, as I want to stay engaged and active with all of you. So thank you. It has been a pleasure working with all of you. And with that, I will move on to our next agenda item. I will turn it over to Mike Romanowski and Bruce DeClean from the FAA to share the FAA responses to Task Group 6, BV loss challenges, and Task Group 8, safety culture recommendations. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate everyone being here for this discussion. We spent a lot of time looking at these recommendations and formulating our response. I'm pleased to have Bruce DeClean join me. Bruce is our Director of Safety Standards and is my counterpart in the Flight Standards Service, where I have the policy and innovation responsibilities in aircraft certification. Overall, the team gave us 21 recommendations in 4 categories, and those were some pretty solid recommendations and cover the gamut. We felt that we needed to bring both of us to the table here today because the recommendations apply both in the certification realm and the operational realm. And we inside the agency have been working very closely on a seamless relationship between the certification and flight standards operational aspects. And we hope to bring that to the discussion today. If I were to characterize, again, with 21 recommendations, we're not going to go into each of those in depth, but what we will do is bin them into 4 areas that will follow into the discussion and talk through these at a high level. A much more detailed response is provided to the DAC members. So we look forward to any follow-on questions and discussion that occurs from this. But overall, before we get into those recommendation categories, I think our response can best be characterized by the saying, and we agree with those recommendations, but I think we're quite sure that we don't want to necessarily be limited in those areas. We don't want to have anything in our practices and our policies as we work in our operations first framework that artificially inhibits the growth and development of the industry. We think that safety can be achieved in a variety of ways, and that's really the ultimate philosophical backdrop to the way we responded to these recommendations. So if we can go to the next slide, we can get into it. Okay, first recommendations, they are categorized as UAV certification, but that again really spans the vehicle and the operation. And with the DAC recommending that we do follow an incremental certification approach that does recognize risk, safety risk, and the complexity of the operation. And again, this has been the approach we've been pursuing. And while the DAC reminded us to affirm that it is still okay to use 44807 waive exemptions in the course of doing business. And the final thing that was in this umbrella was to have an evaluation of each of the existing regulatory parts for those vehicles that couldn't be subject to the durability and reliability framework that we have, a more streamlined, operationally demonstration of the vehicle's durability and reliability. For those that are beyond those thresholds, do a review of the existing airworthiness regulations and look for the relevance and adoption of those parts. So if we go to the next slide, we can, the way we're approaching it, we are using a risk-based approach, as I mentioned. We for smaller UAS, where it doesn't make a lot of sense to do a piece part, component by component, system by system level review, we're using the demonstrated durability and reliability framework for those vehicles. We've issued notices in the Federal Register to talk to the approaches of those. We're working with a number of companies on finalizing the certification basis of those vehicles. At the same time, we're working very closely with flight standards on making sure that the demonstrations that are done under durability and reliability transition seamlessly into the operational evaluations and approvals. So I don't know if Bruce, if you want to comment at all on this or any of the other items, please just join in. But it's an important thing as we move forward to recognize that seamless nature of the approach we're taking here. At the same time, we recognize that we cannot and should not inhibit the continued use of 44807 exemptions to transition to operational approvals where we don't have the ability yet to do those airworthiness approvals. And the final thing I will add is that, looking at those vehicles that are beyond the durability and reliability demonstration, we have been working quite closely with a number of companies initiated through our Aircraft Certification Center for Emerging Concepts and Innovation to work out detailed certification bases for programs. And this applies in both unmanned and manned programs to define a certification basis and working with flight standards and other parts of the agency on a pathway to operations so that we can actually learn to leverage the existing regulatory parts. We believe in the agency right now that the current regulations, whether that's the newly drafted performance-based Part 23 Amendment 64 that rely on performance-based standards with voluntary consensus standards as means to compliance, give us a large amount of flexibility to certify a wide range of vehicles. We also have the existing regulatory parts in Part 27 for helicopters. And we also have a provision to establish special class certifications under a Part 2117B. All of those give us a great deal of flexibility to achieve the appropriate safety targets and facilitate the development of new vehicles and transition those into operations. So Bruce, I guess I'll turn to you and ask if you want to comment a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good morning and good afternoon, folks, depending on where you are. I just want to emphasize sort of the framework that Mike shared in the philosophy. We really recognize in the FAA how critical it is that we integrate the certification of the aircraft and the aircraft system to the operation and the operational approval. And so, Mike represents and has responsibility for the certification policies. I represent and have responsibility for the operational and airman policies. And we're really pulling those together. And so you'll hear that as we go through the next couple of charts on some of the specifics. The beyond visual line of sight implementation necessarily involves, under the current rulemaking and under the current regulations, some exemptions and waivers. And so those come through an operational evaluation. But what we want to do is lean on the certification that's done based on the aircraft and the system. And that's really why we're doing this jointly, and want to be able to cover the topic and answer any questions you have together. So that's the only thing I really want to emphasize. And Mike, I'll turn it over to you to cover the next batch of recommendations.
Thank you, Bruce. If we can have the next slide, please. Okay. There were, again, a number of recommendations in the area of detect and avoid, both technologies and capabilities. And I think, things that looked at recommending we accept the work of standards development organizations, define areas where we don't require or wouldn't require a DAA system, leverage the work of the Pathfinder projects and integrated pilot projects to enable beyond visual line of sight operations, and then continue to work with the industry and the stakeholder community to foster the development of continued technologies. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk about how we're viewing this. First thing, what really dominates our thought process with the area of detect and avoid is there is no one single solution. And the solutions that are there really do depend on the vehicle and its operational concepts, which include where is it operating and in what manner. So we believe that we can currently accommodate a range of detect and avoid solutions through that approach Bruce just talked about in terms of waivers, exemptions, also certificating on board equipment as necessary. But overall, the driving premise is that the DAA strategy in that operational environment has to have an acceptable level of safety. We do also have applications, we're evaluating them where we believe that the DAA systems are not required. Infrastructure masking, hugging along power lines or towers or what have you, where there's a natural shielding of the operation or examples. And so as we're looking at this, we want to be sure we're not over prescribing this. We don't believe, as I alluded to before, that detect and avoid, there is a magic detect and avoid box, that there may be detect and avoid boxes and systems that will be on aircraft that are appropriate for individual situations and operating environments, but there may be other solutions as well that depend on both onboard and ground based infrastructure and operational practice for that matter. So we are continuing to work across the range with the research community, with the consensus standards community to further advance those standards. And again, that is leveraging, most of the work we're doing is leveraging the current projects that we're working and past projects that we've worked in the agency. It's really informing, doing a tremendous job of informing our thought processes and our policy development, both on the certification and operational approval side. And one thing to note, how we do and will review consensus standards to streamline approvals, it's not required that we actually have done that approval in advance of somebody using them. If folks are coming in with standards we have not evaluated, if they're coming in with their own company proposals, they're using work in process in the consensus standards community, we will and do evaluate those for use in the operations and vehicles that are on in front of us. So we again don't want to over-prescribe in this area and actually inhibit good, safe, innovative solutions. So Bruce, anything you want to add here?
I think Mike covered all of the salient points. As he described in the backdrop philosophy on the first chart, Our assessment is we're not at a point right now of maturity of market or maturity of our criteria to hone in on a singular solution. And so what you really see here is our openness to any solution, as long as that solution provides an acceptable level of safety. It can include DAA, it may not. Again, collision avoidance is a broad class of problem, and DAA is a component of how we assure there is no collision. So that's the backdrop. We really are eager to continue to work with you all and other forums to assist and really help drive and support. Over time, there will probably be a consensus of what sort of strategies make the most sense, and then how do we codify and normalize those. We will absolutely stay engaged and continue to work with the industry consensus bodies, which are, sort of leading edge indicators of those consensus points. So that's just to sort of reiterate the philosophy, I think.
Mhm.
I'll turn it back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Bruce. And if we can have the next slide, please. Okay. Large number of recommendations in the area of autonomy. I think there were 7 or 8 individual recommendations. So first was whether we should recognize a singular terminology set called out in the ASTM standards. And then some follow-ons about should we have standard scenarios for that help drive requirements and characterize particular operational risk profiles and the like. And again, back to the additional thing we've talked about of supporting consensus standards development and performance-based approaches, and looking to have research support the development of those standards and performance-based approaches. And then in a couple of the recommendations, there was a blending of the vehicle operational and autonomy with the UTM autonomy as well. And let's see, other recommendations dealt with expanding our risk models to look at overall societal risk versus strictly focusing on aviation risk as we're looking to characterize or the benefit of automated systems, or frankly UAS systems overall. And as Bruce mentioned, in the context of detect and avoid and collision avoidance, whether or not there should be a defined performance-based definition of well clear. So that these were fairly broad ranging and far-reaching recommendations. If we go to the next slide, please. And I think the philosophy that we're talking about really does echo our response here as well. So we do support the definitions in AC 377, but we don't want to preclude the use of other definition sets that make sense. Again, as this industry continues to mature, we think that those will fall out. The key thing for us is just making sure when we are engaged in a program that we actually have the clarity of the definitions that are being used, that we are applying the correct principles in the program. We do like the idea of standard scenarios and would welcome if there's additional work from the DAC or industry in some of the consensus bodies or what have you, to identify some of the what may be standard scenarios that you view as most relevant, so that we can lead to streamlining approvals of both vehicles and their operations. We think that that's could be a powerful idea. And again, to reiterate some of the ongoing work and where we are targeting some of our research portfolio is that strong engagement. We've got very strong engagement with NASA. We've got with the Air Force on Agility Prime. We have our COE for unmanned systems. We have a whole host of things that we do want to make sure. One of our prime emphasis is on the data being available to assist in policy development and consensus standards development. For those that broke recommendations that were broaching on the UTM, we think that that is further work that should be taken on inside the Task Group 7, that is dealing with UTM infrastructure. So we welcome that and continued work in those areas. And then finally, on the risk-based discussion, we are open to the idea of looking at societal risk. And I think this is an area where we would welcome additional insights from the members and the industry on how do we find sources to character. We've struggled finding good, credible sources of how to characterize that data. Overall societal risk, that we would welcome input and feedback on how to get that data, factor it in, have credible sources, and use it and apply it. So that is an area we're definitely open to some additional interest as well. So Bruce, any comments in this area?
Nothing to add, Mike. You've covered it very well. Thank you.
All right, very good. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, please. And I think the area of command and control and spectrum is, again, there's a common theme about making sure that FAA, FCC, and NTIA really work closely together, not only in development of the 2018 reauthorization report to Congress, but also in continued work, and that we look at all aspects of spectrum as it relates to UAS as well, and take full advantage of what is out there and available to us. So if we can go to the next slide, and we'll talk about, this is an area where I think we have strong agreement. We have worked closely with FCC and NTIA on the congressional report that was prepared. We're in continuing to work closely with them on a variety of issues and maintaining close coordination across the board. In the course of doing that, we are taking a data-driven, performance-based, risk-based approach so that we are not bound to perhaps the single source of spectrum use. And I think that's clear when that we are going to be dependent on cellular cells in remote ID, right? That was part of our recent rulemaking. So we're continuing to advance those concepts, and for us, it's really about actually is having the right level of risk, safety risk management, and having the right operational safety. And as we achieve those with the various spectrum capabilities that are available to us. So Bruce, anything else you want to add here? I think this is hard for us to say an area where we disagree on what was recommended in the recommendations.
Thanks, Mike. Just to sort of emphasize the variability that we see across, what really are the command and control requirements. You can take two endpoints of an unmanned aircraft that is predominantly autonomous, and the link is only used to tell it a destination, to the other extreme of an unmanned aircraft where the remote pilot on the ground is in the control loop, actively controlling the aircraft. Those two endpoints both represent part of the family of unmanned aircraft. They both represent the family of a link that we generically call the command and control link, but they have dramatically different requirements on the reliability of the link, the protection of the link. And that's really what's motivating us here in this strategy. So I just wanted to use those two example endpoints to illustrate what Mike was describing. Back to you, Mike.
Perfect. Thank you, Bruce. And I guess this, I believe, is the final slide. So I think we will turn it open to discussion from the DAC members. If there are any questions or comments that you want to make, remind you to please raise your hand in the Zoom command, using the Zoom command on your dashboard, and the moderator will unmute you for the question.
Okay. Our first comment is from Jazz Banga.
Hi, folks. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. So some things to consider on the detect and void, some experience we've had. 3 categories of obstacles, you could say. We've seen static obstacles like trees and everything else that's fixed on the ground. Dynamic obstacles where things are flying in the way of the UAS, and then we have sensors that are available on the ground. Our experience has been that static is actually you're seeing a lot of systems that are pretty good at detecting trees, wires, things like that. The real challenge lies in dynamic obstacles, whether it's a flag moving in front or whether it's a cable or a crane. We've seen a lot of the AI systems fail to identify dynamic systems because they've been optimized, dynamic obstacles, because they've been optimized mostly for terrain. So my suggestions are that we consider, one, on the static side, more accurate terrain mapping from a lot of the LEOs and NEOs. A lot of these satellites are providing daily refreshed imagery in 3 dimensions that could be possibly used for a great database of obstacles that are fixed. On the dynamic side, I think we should really think about testing the ability for a lot of these aircraft that have AI on board and collision systems to be able to stop dynamic. And the final thing is there are a variety of sensors being deployed as well for those aircraft that can be communicated to warn of impending collisions, et cetera.
Thank you. I think, Bruce, I'm going to welcome your comments here too. I think in general, as we're looking, those are some great areas to explore systematically. I think as we're looking at these for programs, the ones that are of most immediate to us are making sure that the first on the static side, that they have the ability to recognize those that have human associated with risk, right, and demonstrate that capability. And the same goes for the dynamic, that we're really able to find and address the airborne vehicles and mitigate against those. What we're seeing across the board is generally a mixture of airborne and ground-based capabilities, with probably a heavier emphasis on the ground side than airborne side for most of the low altitude activity. But it really is, each of these right now, what we're seeing is more or less a recipe unique to the individual applicant and operation. Bruce, do you want to comment at all?
Nothing to add. That's great. Jazz, thanks for sharing those ideas and your experience.
Okay, next we'll go to Bob Brock. Oh, hang on, wait. You're on mute, Bob. There we go.
Try again.
There we go.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having us all together. These are valuable conversations. And at the end of the day, one of the things that we're observing as we participate in the task groups, Michael Chasen talked about that this is not a clean process. It's a rough and rugged and difficult process that doesn't always fit into the norms and the paradigms that we're used to with manned aviation. So Mike and Bruce, you have a tough job in trying to ground some of these hard problems into how does it fit against the existing federal aviation regulations. So my recommendation as we work with this and the success that we've seen as both an IPP lead and also now a Beyond member is we need to find, and we're working with your teams to do this and AUS and others, how do we get those new paradigms and new ways of doing business put out in a way that even our flight standards and our folks that are absolutely bound to the written rule of law, how do we get that rule of law to incorporate the new emerging technologies that have to happen at the speed that organizations like Wing and Joby and organizations like that, they're moving too fast to be able to look backwards and get those assumptions or scenarios to necessarily fit. So perhaps we need to find places where we can take more risk to gather the data to do the actual rule writing in an informed way. So thank you. These task groups are extraordinarily powerful in the fact that they have an opportunity to really iron out in a very unstructured manner what the art of the possible looks like. So we look forward to getting flight standards and ATO and the rest in a place that we can empower you to say yes more readily. So that's it. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, I really appreciate those remarks, Bob. They resonate with me. That's part of the challenge that we have and we recognize in terms of the workforce we have and what they're familiar with. We have a lot of specialists and they're faced with the innovation and they rely on their experience. And those two things don't necessarily connect together. So we do have a variety of activities underway to help our workforce be more prepared in evaluating that. I would emphasize, and this part of this is how we talk, is part of our rules is the authority to grant waivers, and part of our rules is the authority to grant exemptions. And so, that's part of the framing of the issue is none of this is about, not complying. It's really about taking advantage of the rules that we have. The FAA is very fortunate to have the exemption authority that we have. And we do need to be using that exemption authority safely to be gaining experiences and inform further growth and changes. So your comments very much hit the mark for us, and I really appreciate them. Mike?
Yeah, Bruce, you really nailed it. And frankly, Bob, I think you nailed it too. The only thing I could add to what Bruce is saying is I think that every day that goes by, every experience that we have, we are learning as an agency, but our people are learning as well. And I think it is really gearing towards between the combinations of that experience, but also the program management framework we've been pulling into place. I think we're moving towards what you described of much more regular and routine aspects to these types of vehicles. And I think that's going to continue to advance as we move forward.
And Mike, I just wanted to add that the program management activities that you've talked about, we're very much focusing our work. Obviously, we take all applicants who come, but in terms of the work that we're coordinating through the Beyond program and our partnerships for safety, they're very much focused on these BV loss questions now. That's the shift that we made post-October, is we are staying keenly focused on what are those types of waivers and exemptions that we can work on together that allow us to gather the data that then allow us to normalize operations into regulation. And so it's a cross the agency activity. Mike and Bruce are here talking today, but every conversation we ever have inside the agency has air traffic in it. And if it has hazmat, we have our friends from ASH in it, right? So it's a very focused activity now.
James Burgess, over to you. We're not hearing you, James.
Gary, on the production side, I saw there might be some problems with James' link. So we might go on, and when we get those solved, we can come back.
Okay, all right. We'll go on to Captain Houston Mills.
Yeah, thank you. And Mike, Bruce, thanks so much for a very insightful follow-up to the DAC Task Group 6 recommendations. Certainly key areas of, I guess the key areas that we'll need to really be successful in very complex operations. So each of them resonated. There's one in particular, as we talked about the UAV certification process and some of the things you guys are thinking about. And certainly, as I think about the UPS Flight Forward, and I'm sure James would say the same thing, from a Google perspective, the Wing perspective. Now, you guys have done a phenomenal job working with us, working with Matternet and some of the processes. Certainly, the 44807 process has proven, with our 135 certificate to be beneficial. One of the things we see as an opportunity, because of the pace of the emerging technology and everything, is either, and I'm not sure when the full certification process will be complete. I know you guys are working on that, but certainly the speed of the process for the 44807, if there's an opportunity to increase the pace of that, I think there's an opportunity there from the feedback I'm receiving. And then the other piece would be, those exemptions themselves, expire, so that going through that protocol of reissuing and getting an extension to the exemption might be another piece that the team thinks about. But certainly the feedback that I've received from our team has just been very complimentary, very appreciative. Just throwing out some thoughts in terms of things that might help enhance the experience and allow for more progress. The other thing I would add is a lot of positive feedback on a risk-based approach. And certainly, I think from the operator's perspective, that's very beneficial, because I think we'll learn a lot with that mindset being included.
Excellent. Bruce, do you want to comment on that? I appreciate that, Houston, considerably.
Just, I guess one component of that I want to spotlight is the 44807 authority that we have. What that authority really gives us is a flexibility in allowing the aircraft to fly in the NAS without the certificate of airworthiness, by statute. Whether we get the certificate of airworthiness or we use a 44807 alternative path, we still have to do a certain body of work to assure that aircraft can safely be in the NAS. So that there's a difference in process. There's not intended to be a difference in outcome, and I want to stress that. And so, sort of, Mike mentioned in the recommendation response, we are really looking to transition to more routine aircraft evaluations and approvals. Part of that is related to the maturity of the process and also the size of the staff involved. So one of the challenges, for new 44807s is we don't have a workforce in place who that is their work. And so within my organization, we prioritize and we borrow folks from other projects and other initiatives, and that comes at a cost of laying some of the groundwork for the future policies that we're really trying to lay. So that's a little bit underneath the surface of kind of the rationale for saying we really are interested in promoting the industry as the certification, the TC process, and Mike has made tremendous progress with his leadership in aircraft cert, as the TC process is adapted and scaled to the aircraft in question. It is really to everyone's benefit for those reasons to take advantage of that scaled TC solution. So let me set that up for you, Mike, and you can talk a little bit more about that perhaps.
Yeah, I think again, it is one of those, Bruce, we've established a framework that is proving to be quite successful with the industry. Obviously, we have to work through the programs and see the first ones through to the certification, but I think we have every confidence at this point that in the not too distant future, we will have type certificated UAS from the durability and reliability process. And that then will make products available to operators who don't necessarily have their own vehicle designs and want to take on, but also, or those that want to operate them on their own as well. But it'll be a major milestone for the industry and the FAA as we see that in the coming months.
Okay, did we get the technical problems with James fixed? Over to you, James.
Let me give that a check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Here we go. We hear you now.
All right, sorry for the microphone trouble. Mike and Bruce, thanks for your comments and responses. I wanted to add to the discussion on risk, and Mike in particular, you mentioned total societal risk. And from Wing's perspective, at least, we'd be happy to offer any data or experience that we've gained over the past few years on thinking about risk that way. And I think it's quite a powerful approach and perspective. And just to give a little bit more detail from our experience, since we're doing deliveries in denser suburban urban areas, we look at risk as a total sort of exposure to that community. And unfortunately, when you look at the data, pedestrian risk and automotive risk is substantially high, actually. And in some cases, getting worse because people are walking around staring at their cell phones and things. And so I think that's a fantastic way to approach risk. And if we can offer any help, I'm sure others on the DAC would love to as well. We'd be happy to do so. But then one additional point is not just for approvals and airworthiness or operational approvals. I think that total risk perspective is a really powerful talking point and message for community acceptance and outreach. There's people who are skeptical of new technology, as they perhaps should be. And we think UAS have a lot to offer, including improving safety in our communities. And if we can speak that way, both internally looking at operational approvals, but also externally about the value this technology adds to society, I think that will go a long way to helping people accept it and feel more comfortable with the value it can truly offer. So happy to contribute in any way on Wing's side, and I'm sure others as well, but I think that's a fantastic area to focus on.
Thank you, James. Go, Bruce.
No, that was Jay. I was just going to say, we hear you, and we've been doing some work inside the agency, and it wouldn't surprise me if very soon we task the DAC with some activities to advise us on this.
Great, good to hear. Thanks, Jay.
Okay, we have time for a few more. We'll go to Kenji Sugahara.
All right, can you hear me?
Very good.
Excellent. So first off, I just want to say thank you to the FAA and the Task Group 6, as I know how many hours and how difficult it is to go through these taskings. One thing I want to mention is that I agree with James 100% in terms of risk. And I appreciate the consideration of standard scenarios like in the Gerasora. And for the folks who don't know what Gerasora is, it's the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking on Unmanned Systems, and SORA's specific operations risk assessment. It's a risk assessment methodology. I also want to say that I really appreciated that the task group recommended and the FAA agreed about exploring operating environments where DAA would not be required, such as obstacle shielding and terrain masking. I know the FPV community is very excited about that. I also want to say thank you to the FAA in making that grant, the assured grant to explore shielded operations. Now, the question that I had for you was whether local BV loss was considered as a stepping stone to full BV loss. A local BV loss being operations within a constrained, well-defined area, such as an operation over an agricultural area or industrial site. Or do you see that as sort of fitting in one of the buckets that you mentioned before?
Bruce, do you want to take that?
Yes, I think that should be under consideration and is under consideration, I guess would be the short answer. Just the part of the challenge for us as we try to take incremental steps is to balance how big is the increment and how big is that bucket, right? And how much does that bucket lead to the next one? So, you know, when we think about issues like the use of masking, that's a relatively straightforward way to close the safety case and take an incremental step. On the other hand, it's not an incremental step that really leads to a whole lot of insight on what happens when you don't have masking. So scenarios like agriculture do represent sort of a different scenario, right? Where you still have a very low exposure risk and you may gain additional experiences. So those are just some rationale of why I think what you're suggesting is absolutely on the table for discussion and consideration and part of our thought process as we figure out our next steps.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go to Kathy Cahill.
Hello, everyone. Just first off, I want to really say thank you guys for keeping the lines open on the DAA aspects. There's a lot of focus on that ground-based, but in a lot of cases, especially here in Alaska, that is not something that is terribly feasible. The scalability when you don't happen to have any infrastructure present means that it will be a challenge. So being open to looking at different DAA systems under different conditions is going to be essential for really coming to a solution that works under some of the unique conditions you're going to get where the terrain is rugged, or you happen to have a case where you don't have radio line of sight, etc. So the fact that you guys are exploring the different aspects and really have not said one size fits all is going to be incredibly important as we move forward, especially when we're dealing with some of the larger aircraft. So where you actually have enough size, weight, and power to be able to carry the onboard systems for DAA fairly easily and achieve your other missions. So that for us has been an important component. And I know it's part of what's going into the Assure Beyond Visual Line of Sight project that's going on with testing of a bunch of DAA systems. So Bruce, I was glad to hear you say that really the maturity of the market and the technology isn't there to provide a solution. I think we really do need to keep it open in terms of what those solutions are. And my other comment had to deal with the large UAS in terms of type certification. We've got durability and reliability for the smalls, and depending, of course, on the area you want to operate, we have some different requirements. But the larges, of course, are going to be up and coming and, no pun intended, a bigger challenge. And so I really do think that in terms of that certification, we're doing durability and reliability under Beyond and a bunch of the other programs. We need to make sure that we do keep our eyes on those larger aircraft and the challenges associated with certifying things that are bigger than 55 pounds.
Yeah.
And one of the things we might want to consider is, do we want to be able to break it down into some other size groups? Because right now 55 and above is a large class. And if you're flying a 300-pound aircraft, it could be very, very different than if you're flying a 747. So we need to make sure that we keep that flexibility in there. But I do appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate your responsiveness.
Thank you for that, Kathy. I think you're actually, the issue of larger certification or airworthiness approvals is something that is square in front of us as well. We do have a number of programs that are looking at, that are, I'll say, conventional airplane size or what have you, that we're looking at the applications of the Part 23's rules to those programs and having a framework to move those forward. There's an in-between, and it's somewhere above 55 and somewhere below the setup of where Part 23 really kicks in, that we have a transition area. And we do have a rulemaking underway. It's called the Modernization of Special Airworthiness Certification, or MOSAIC, that is looking at not only the airworthiness approval under special airworthiness category, but also the operations, maintenance, and airman side of these regulations. That is looking at, that's the model of light sport aircraft that are out there today operating very successful